I also, as you've noticed, have muted all participants except for our speakers, just because we have so many folks online. And because of the size of the audience today, I think depending how things go, we're going to attempt to curate the question and answer period instead of opening it up democratically, which is to say that when you have a question or a comment, please either post it in the chat or you can direct message me in a private chat and send it. And that way I can organize questions and pose them to our speakers. Or if our speakers see a question in the chat that they want to answer right away, they're welcome to do that, but also shouldn't feel obligated to try to monitor the chat while speaking, which I know can be a lot. Because this is a more formal presentation, at least for the first hour, without a lot of participant FaceTime, I think maybe we won't bother taking a break in the middle. But again, folks are free to turn their cameras off and move around as they need to. We at the Community Asylum Seekers Project have been very happy for the last 6 months or so to be working with the Ethiopian Community Development Council, which is one of 9 state agencies responsible for resettling refugees in the United States. We've been working with the ECDC and their partners and integrating the existing support structures for asylum seekers into the new community effort to welcome Afghans and refugees. We will soon be moving into a new office alongside the ECDC, which is exciting for us, and we will be working hard there to integrate our systems of volunteer support and local advocacy to best serve our new neighbors when they arrive. As the Boston-based historian Daniel Immerwahr points out in one of my favorite books of the last 5 years, historically, US Americans' knowledge of other countries and cultures follows the trail of our government's imperial wars. The human flows of refugees and asylum seekers tend to follow the same trail, and we now find ourselves in that position. We are grateful to be joined today by 2 speakers who come to share their experiences and their understandings of what it is like to resettle from Afghanistan to the United States in the trail of one of those wars, and how we, as their new neighbors, can prepare to offer the most informed welcome possible. Our speakers are Dr. Noah Coburn, who is an anthropologist at Bennington College, and I think technically my former boss. Noah has spent several years in Afghanistan and investigated the human cost of the SIV program. He is the author, among several other books, of Under Contract, The Invisible Workers of America's Global War, and he lives in Brattleboro. Ismaeil Hakimi is originally from Ghazni province in Afghanistan and trained as a lawyer in Iran. After the fall of the Taliban in 2001, he returned to Afghanistan and worked with a US contractor to rebuild the country's justice system. He came to the United States in 2014 on a special immigrant visa and currently lives in Salt Lake City. Mr. Hakimi, I will turn it over to you to present, and if you have any trouble sharing your screen, just let me know. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kate. I'm trying to share my screen. Yeah. You see my screen?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Ismaeil Hakimi, a refugee from Afghanistan. In this presentation, I will talk briefly about Afghanistan and war in Afghanistan, my family level, and why did I immigrate to Iran and later on to United States, and opportunities and challenges for refugees here, and how to help refugees. I was born in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is multi-ethnic society with 55 ethnic groups, 4 larger ethnic groups, Pashtun, Tajik, Uzbek, Hazaras, and I am a Hazara. Afghanistan is a multilingual country. It is home for more than 40 languages, around 200 different dialects, with 2 different official or formal languages, which are Pashto and Farsi. Some people say Dari. My language is Farsi. Afghanistan is a country with 99% Muslims. There are numbers of Sikhs originally from India, and we had one Jews who emigrated recently, 3 months ago. Afghanistan has a majority of Sunnis with about 25 Shia. I am a Shia. Afghanistan is a unique geopolitical location, landlocked country, it is located between several important regions: South Asia, Central Asia, and Middle East. Neighboring countries are China, Pakistan, Iran, and Russia. 4 factors: ethnicity, religion, language, and geopolitics play major roles, mostly negative in Afghanistan. My family, we immigrated to Iran through Pakistan. I went to school, studied Sharia or Islamic law and Iranian law, and graduated from Sharia and also a law school. After 20 years in Iran, I returned to Afghanistan to help rebuilding Afghanistan. But my mother died in Iran and we buried her there. My family in Afghanistan, in 2003, I returned to Afghanistan. I worked with national and international public and private organizations until 2014. For example, I worked with the United Nations as legal officer. My family joined me in 2008. So for several years, I was alone there. My family was in Iran. In Afghanistan, we built our home. This period was the best portion of my life. The days of war scattered my family and relatives to 4 continents and many countries. First, we immigrated to Pakistan, then Iran. And my younger brother immigrated to Australia through ship and boat, using boat and ship, passing the sea. My older brother went to Europe, passing the jungles and walking on the roads. But I moved to the United States. Unfortunately, the SIV law did not allow me to bring my older son with me. He was 21 years old at that time. We will talk more about SIV law later on. He went to Turkey in order to find a secure and safe place. But unfortunately, Turkey denied him and expelled him back to Afghanistan. So we 4 brothers now living in 4 countries in 4 different continents. My oldest brother lives in Iran. Why did I leave Afghanistan? Because of war. I'll write here, present here, a brief history of war. USSR, you might hear this word, which is Union of Soviet Social Republic, or former Russia, invaded Afghanistan 40 years ago in 1979. But with the 10 years later, in 1989 after fighting with Mujahideen. Mujahideen fought for 10 years. Who were Mujahideen? Mujahideen were guerrilla-type militant groups. It was a joint venture between USA, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan to fight against Russia. USA provided weapons and equipment, Saudi Arabia provided money, and Pakistan provided management and training. After victory, Mujahideen fought for power, lead the country to a chaos, monarchy, and civil war, paved the way for Taliban. But at that time, USA, United States, abandoned Afghanistan. Who was Taliban, or who is Taliban? There are students from Wahhabi Islamic schools in Pakistan, mostly Pashtuns from east and south part of Afghanistan. They took power 2 times. First, in 1996 to 2001, and second, on August 15th, 2021. What did Taliban commit? They committed massacres against Afghan civilians, killed thousands of people, especially Hazaras. They banned all girls from schools and all women from work. They provided safe haven to Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, who did the 9/11 terrorist attack on New York. Relation between Taliban and the United States. After 9/11 attack, the United States attacked Taliban to turn over Osama bin Laden to the United States, shut down all Al-Qaeda bases in Afghanistan, but Taliban denied. When United States attacked and overturned the Taliban in 2001, Taliban began guerrilla fighting, so war lasted for 2 more decades. But war ended with an agreement between Trump administration and Taliban that United States lives safely and Taliban gets everything. USA withdrew from Afghanistan, left everything behind for the Taliban, almost $80 billion weapons, as I hear. Afghan government and military collapsed. Taliban took the power. All foreigners left Afghanistan. All borders were closed. No government, dead silence. Women banned from work and girls prevented from education. The President Ashraf Ghani, who was supported by the United States, escaped with $169 million cash. Why SIV? Year by year, the situation became worse, especially when the United States decided to leave Afghanistan. Taliban atrocities increased and the numbers of casualties raised. Situation became more dangerous and risky for people working for Americans, and many of them were killed by Taliban. Then I decided to apply for SIV to come to the United States. So I want to compare here between SIV holders and other refugees other than SIV holders. There are similarities and differences between SIV visa and other cases of refugees. As you might know that aliens who come to the United States, they will locate in different categories. Some of them have passport, visa, and the others it might be asylum seekers who apply here in the United States, inside the United States, and others who come legally. They are refugees, but the category of refugees are SIV holders. SIV program or Special Immigrant Visa Program has been a bliss for people who have worked with Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. And this program rescued thousands of them and their families. So it is a big bliss for us, especially for me. Their similarities are that refugees, SIV holders like other refugees can get IOM and federal assistance like resettlement in the United States. They can apply for citizenship after 5 years. But the differences are SIV holders or SIV case is based on SIV Act, but other cases are based on United Nations Convention. SIV case is based on SIV or United States employment and United States relation threat. They must get threat by terrorists and other enemies because of their work with the United States. And the other difference is that it is a safe and easy arrival to the United States. They just fly to the United States. But the other, they have, some of them or most of them have problems and difficulties when they reach to the destination. For example, my younger brother forced to go and pass the ocean. My older brother waited for long times in Greece and walked on jungles and stayed on jungles and walked by road or went by bus. So it is a big difference. SIV holders get green card upon arrival, but other refugees get their green card after 1 year. But the other difference for some SIV holders like me, we could not bring our parents and older kids, but other refugees can bring all family members. The last difference which I can mention is this program, SIV program, is a temporary process, but other cases for refugees seems not to be temporary. So there are mostly difference between them. So for the second time, we forced to immigrate. We immigrate to the United States. First, we came to California State and San Diego. In San Diego, IOM and Alliance for African Assistance and the government, local government, helped us to settle. People and families helped us to make connection and contact with the locals. For example, I tell my story. When I helped my family, we moved from Coburn airport, fly to Dubai airport, and we reached there. We had a bag of plastic bag which is an IOM, so we were recognized easily from far away. IOM people could recognize us easily, so they came to us, asked us, and guided us to and did our paperwork there. Then we fly to Frankfurt. And Frankfurt, since we had 1 hour delay, our flight had delay 1 hour. So we arrived Frankfurt airport later than usual. So IOM person came to us and said, hurry up, because you are late, you will miss the flight. So we're 8 Afghan families. We rushed to our airplane. And when I was the first person from 8 families entered the airport, and they allowed us to enter. So upon our entrance, the plane fly that time. If IOM person was not there or representative was not there, we could miss the chance. And another case, when we arrived in San Diego, my caseworker, whose name was Parker, asked me, do you want to have connection with some families, people? I said, yes. They introduced me a lady who had several children. She was the only supporter of her family. And we met in a place. She told us, do you want to meet with our community? I said, yes. So 2 days later, they had a ceremony, a gathering. So on that place, I was introduced and my family was introduced to male and female, our community member there. So it was an event which was very good for us and was very helpful for me. So in San Diego, my kids started their schools. And I worked in a high school and went to the University of San Diego. After 3 years and a half, we moved to Utah, Salt Lake City. We made connection with local community. My 3 kids went to the University of Utah, which is the best university of our state. And after 1 year and a half, we bought our house. So because in this city, state of Utah, there were good opportunities and chances that we could find work easily, and 3-4 of us started work, so we could afford to buy a house. Okay, let's talk about refugees' life in the United States. Refugees, when they arrive in the United States, they have opportunities and challenges. They feel safe and secure. For sure, everyone who escaped from risk and danger, they feel safe and secure here. It is the big and important things that they can get. They enjoy freedom and equality. For example, for me, which I had a problem in Afghanistan, and also when I lived in Iran together with my family, we were an ethnic group which had a history of discrimination. So when we came here, we enjoyed equality here and freedom which we have here. Another opportunity for refugees, they grow by education and work. This chance most of people in Afghanistan don't have because of corruption and because of discrimination. They have the civil rights almost like as US citizens. So all immigrants, refugees have the same rights like US citizens. Yes, they cannot vote. They cannot can be hired for some federal offices. and they can get passport and few others. They can buy a house, they can buy cars, they can buy everything, they can move here and there and everywhere. While in Iran, we had problem. Refugees were not allowed to go to other cities. Every time they want to go there to other cities, they to see other families and friends or do some other work, they need to get permit from the government. Sometimes they did not allow. They should give their document there and go and come back. For example, if I went from Tehran to Isfahan, I needed to go first to immigration department to get a letter that please allow me to go to Isfahan, for example. When I arrived there, I should go to immigration department in Isfahan and ask them to stamp my letter and come back, return back letter to the immigration in Tehran. So it was very hard and difficult for us, especially for Hazara like me, Hazara people like me. We were recognized easily because we were the main Afghans and immigrants and Afghans in Iran because of our faces, our features. And other ethnic groups like Pashtuns and Tajiks, they are similar, they have similar faces like Iranians. They could not be recognized, but we as Hazara, we were different. So we had very hard, lot of hardship in Afghanistan and Iran. So it is a very big bliss for us. And freedom of moment, which I explained. So we can buy car, house, and other social activities. But challenges, the most challenge which a refugee might have is homesickness. Most of them think about their previous life, about them. They feel about their future, past. They have feeling of missing family members and friends, missing their home, assets, and relations which they have, and their social and economic status. Some of them have a higher status, so they have good enough assets and properties, home, etc. So when they come here, and so for several months or even years, they think about the past and compare past and the present situation. So homesickness sometimes has negative aspects for them or result. Sometimes it results in this. I heard when I was in San Diego, a lady who had homesickness, she got sick and finally died because she had not a lot of connection with other community members, Afghan communities, and she becomes sick and finally we hear she died. The other challenge is communication problem. Language is a big issue for refugees. SIV holders, mostly they work with Americans. They can speak English, but their family might not know English. So it is a big chance for them. They can speak and can communicate with others here in the United States. But refugees, for the most, they can't speak English, so it is hard for them. Afghan refugees who come here, they are mostly Pashtuns, they speak Pashto. So it is hard for them to speak in English. Minority of them are Tajiks, Uzbeks, and Hazaras. So they speak mostly Pashto. Also, they have problem or concern about finding a job. Mostly they ask, how can I find a job? How can I support my family? And they ask about government support and benefits. And I received a lot of messages and calls from migrants or refugees who are in the camps and who are coming from Afghanistan or other states. They contact us and ask us which state is better for us. We can leave, we can find a job, we can support our family. The other challenge they might have is not knowing the laws and local do's and don'ts. So it is hard for them because every society, every state has their own laws and regulation and do's and don'ts. So it is very hard for them not knowing the regulations and policies and do's and don'ts. My final slide. What to do for refugees? It is good to keep constant communication, to provide information and consultation on different issues like training and school chances, home and job opportunities, and also introducing the neighborhood. So if locals want to help refugees, so the main issue for them is how to find a home in a better place, in a friendly area, and how they find the jobs, because their expertise, their knowledge, and their education are different. Employers here will not pay attention to their experiences and knowledge. There are some categories that are welcomed by employers here, like engineers who have studied engineering and later on worked with American companies, and also people who had education and experience in computer science and worked with American companies as IDs. So those categories welcomed by employers here, by companies here, and they can get good paying jobs. So it is very good chance for them. But for the others, it is very hard to find job, because even they have bachelor or master or even PhD, they can make, they can translate and make equivalent for them. There are companies, there are agencies that provide equivalent to local documents. But when you provide them to find a job, it is hard to pay attention to that. So every refugees here considered starting from zero. So it is a big problem for them. Their knowledge, their experience count zero. It's not works for the employers here much. And also they do not have credit. They start their credit from zero here. It is so. It is big help if you want to help them to find a proper job. And also it is good to help them to stand on their feet. You can talk to them, explain to them how they can find a job and they can support their families, and in order not to stand on government support forever, not to feel alone, and should be active in the society. So it is a big issue, important issue. Locals can help them with their language. So there are courses in each city or most of the cities welcoming refugees and migrants. They have English classes, and also people can go to their homes and times to times talk with them, improve their language. So help them with job and home. Another important thing is that locals can help and mentor their kids. Even there is a big difference between elders and kids, that kids can adopt easily and can learn language very, very easily. When they go to school after 6 months, 1 year, their language is almost good. But even they need help. Some schools have some assistance or help their teachers, or they have a section in their schools helping their refugees. But most of the schools don't have that. It is a big help if locals help them, help their kids going there in their homes and talk with their kids and help them with their homeworks. We have here many families, mostly every family with kids have a friend family. They support them with their needs, how to go to the doctor, how to find a job, how to go, for example, they do not have car, vehicle at the beginning. They help them and take them here and there. And if they have kids, local people goes during the week one time or 2 times and talk with the kids and help them with their homeworks. So thank you. If you have any question now or after, when we have question section, you can ask. I will answer.
Thanks, Mr. Hakimi. Well, I'll just jump in if that's okay, and then we can take some more questions towards the end. I've been working in Afghanistan since 2005, and I started working with Mr. Hakimi about 14 years ago now, I realize. And just to highlight from his presentation, Mr. Hakimi worked on the constitutional commission that wrote Afghanistan's constitution. He worked for the Human Rights Commission there. And I think the fact that his degrees are from Iran means that they're then not necessarily recognized in the United States. And these are the type of struggles that oftentimes some of these SIV recipients have that they really need to work on, and we need to support them with. I think, Mr. Hakimi, if you want to stop sharing screen, I think we can all see each other a little bit better. There we go. And I'll try to keep my portion short, but let me just make 4 general observations and 3 recommendations that grow out of some of the points that Mr. Hakimi was making. First of all, that's one of the things that Mr. Hakimi pointed to is Afghanistan has been through 40 years of war. And that war didn't affect the country evenly. So a lot of the trauma that some of these refugees are going to be dealing with is recent, and a lot of it is deeply buried in the past. And really different parts of the country have experienced this war very differently. So when you talk to people in Kabul, really the worst time in Kabul, most people will tell you, were the 1990s, the Civil War. There were 7 different groups that rocketed the city, and it was just awful in Kabul. If you talk to people in Kandahar, the worst period in Kandahar was around the Obama surge in the 2010 range, when you had drone strikes, you had a lot of terrorist attacks. That was really the worst time in Kandahar. For many rural parts of the country, right now is considered a better time because the drones are gone. So making sure that you don't assume exactly what the nature of the trauma is that these refugees will have. It could be recent, it could be deep in the past. They have complex histories of this conflict. And like Mr. Hakimi, many of them will have been displaced multiple times, whether it's to another country like Pakistan and Iran, where many were displaced during the 1980s, or just displaced internally in the country. Afghans are been constantly sort of forced around the country And particularly over the past summer, a lot of folks from rural areas were forced into Kabul. So you have a large number of internally displaced people in Kabul now that you might be interacting with. The other important thing is that politically and socially, the groups were also very unevenly benefiting from the US presence or at risk under the Taliban. So as Mr. Hakimi highlighted, particularly the Shia minority, the Hazara, suffered terribly under the Taliban period, which has an extremist Sunni version of their religion. As a result, a lot of Hazaras actually did relatively better during the American years, and Hazaras in particular, there are several universities set up in certain parts of Kabul, and they did much better during that time, but now they're being targeted even more by the Taliban because of that. You can say very similar things about women, frankly. Women, the past 20 years was much better for women in Afghanistan than previous times had been. And now, in many ways, they are once again at risk with the Taliban not allowing girls over 6th grade to attend school again. Similarly, with the SIV program, a lot of government officials, people with connections to the international community, journalists, human rights workers, these are all the figures that are increasingly being targeted by the Taliban. And not to be too cynical and dark, but frankly, the generation of Afghans who were told by Americans that if they supported democracy, if they supported human rights, if they got an education, that they could live in a stable and prosperous country. Those are the people that are most being targeted right now. And a lot of those Afghans worked very closely with the internationals and really bought into a lot of that American rhetoric. And I think have a lot of affinity for America, but also feel very betrayed by America because the promise as they understood it was broken in many ways. The next piece that I think is also really important that Mr. Hakimi pointed on is everybody who immigrates to the United States still has Afghan family back in Afghanistan. So they might feel individually safer, but none of these evacuations are a success. They are all leaving pieces of themselves, close family connections back in the country. So please don't assume that they're okay or safe now, because they won't necessarily feel that way as long as the Taliban are in power. It's also important, and here in part in Brattleboro, we just don't know what type of refugees we're going to receive from Afghanistan, but it's important to understand there's also been different streams of refugees from Afghanistan. Some as early as the 1980s that have been very established in Virginia and California in particular. Many of those leaving now are, like Mr. Hakimi, well-educated lawyers, doctors, human rights advocates. So I think compared to other refugee streams, it's actually fairly likely that you're going to get a better educated, higher socioeconomic class of refugee that's arriving. Meantime, we've also heard reports that in some of the camps right now, there also are a large number of ANA soldiers and folks that worked for the defense forces who probably don't have that same level of education. Again, with the SIV process up to recent days, it's been primarily fairly well educated. But we don't know exactly what that's gonna look like in Brattleboro. And I will say in terms of, you also heard Mr. Hakimi started in San Diego and eventually moved to Utah. I do think there's a lot that actually appeals is appealing about Southern Vermont. A lot of Afghans do prefer sort of the rural areas and are settled first in cities and then end up moving to more rural places. The fact that there's not an Afghan community here and not many Muslims around is probably going to be something of a strike against the area. But that doesn't mean that there won't be some Afghans that might not find this a very appealing place to be. So 3 recommendations. Any interest in Afghan history or culture will definitely be appreciated. Ask where they're from, ask what their family did, One of the things that I think is sometimes counterintuitive, I know a lot of you are associated with churches. Afghans are much more friendly towards Christians than they are towards atheists. And then we sort of joke about it that, you know, the Christians are just like Muslims, they just got the prophets a little bit wrong. Whereas the communists who are atheists, that's a little harder for a good Afghan Muslim to wrap their head around. Frankly, the fact that churches are reaching out, even though it is a different religion, is still, I think, appreciated in a lot of ways. Somebody asked me a couple of questions about this, and I do think it's important to keep in mind that Afghans are socially conservative, but that our conception of socially conservative is not always their definition of socially conservative. Most Afghans don't drink, but I would say drinking is not considered as offensive as eating pork. Eating pork is just considered crazy. Why would you eat a pig? That's the most disgusting thing. That's the type of thing to sort of just be aware of, try to understand, and really similarly on a lot of women's issues. We can say Afghanistan is a more segregated by gender society. I have lots of very progressive liberal Afghan friends who, one of my good friends who I did an interview with recently, you know, said, well, before I make any business decision, I have to ask my wife because she does all the finances in the family. She's got the head for the numbers. And yet, socially speaking, usually the men sort of socialize together and the women socialize together, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a sign of disrespect or something like that. On a very concrete level, someone also asked things like shaking hands. If myself as an Afghan or as an American man would never sort of extend my hand to an Afghan woman, but a useful thing to do is you can put your hand on your heart like this. This is sort of a common greeting. And then if they extend their hand, shake it. And if they don't, that's fine too. But things like that to try to be aware of social differences and be aware of and take cues from them. Afghans don't like people to wear shoes in their houses. So keep your eyes open if they're not wearing shoes. But maybe some Afghans who live in America get used to it. I don't know. Mr. Hakimi probably knows that better than I do. But if you see a pile of shoes by the door at the house, you should probably take your shoes off as well. And really just ask them what they need to feel safe and comfortable. And then I'll make one last somewhat joking point, but then open it up a little bit for questions. Remember, they are Afghan refugees. They are not Afghani refugees. Afghani is the currency. So calling them Afghani is like calling an American a dollar. It's a little weird and a little insulting. So keep in mind, they're Afghans. But I think we're happy to take questions for either Mr. Hakimi or myself. Both about more concrete things and not. Kate did email me a question about language tutorials. My own personal advice, as Mr. Hakimi pointed out, Dari, which is closely related to Farsi, and Pashto are the two main languages. And this reflects some of my own personal biases, I would advocate for you trying Dari if you do go online and look for some tutorials, Dari or Farsi. In part because there's more material available there, but also in part and more pragmatically, Pashto is really, really hard. It's really hard for Americans, but it's also really hard for Afghans. So there's actually more Pashto speakers who speak Dari than Dari speakers who speak Pashto. So again, if you find out that they're Pashto, you might want to learn some of the greetings. There's a long, very pleasant set of greetings. Assalamu alaikum, Chatorasi, Hubasi, Jorasi, Familiton, Joras, that you can see Mr. Hakimi likes, where you ask, how are you? How is your family? Is your soul healthy? May you not be tired. These are all things that you say before you sort of open up a conversation. And if you can learn some of those, and again, feel free, especially if you're in Brattleboro, I'm more than happy to practice a few with you. And then there's a different set. So if they are Pashto speakers, you can learn Sange, Jore, Bakhere, but you can hear it's sort of a tougher sound of consonants. So I'm not quite as good at that as I am at the Dari ones. But those types of things I think will be really appreciated, and trying to find out where they're from in Afghanistan, find out a little bit about that area of the country. It's a beautiful country that's very different in different parts. I don't know if people want to hop in with questions, or what should we do, Kate?
Why don't I first, we have a list of a couple that have been submitted to me, and I can bring those up, but we don't actually have that many. So then, after we go through a couple, we can just open it up, if that's okay with you. I think many of the questions that have been emailed or messaged to me, the two of you have addressed to a certain extent, like what are some baseline don'ts that new neighbors should be keeping in mind related to cultural expectations or gender. And your point about handshakes is really key to that, I think, about, taking off shoes and stuff like that. One question that somebody emailed me was, what are some of the cultural tendencies in Afghanistan about trauma processing and healing? Is it common for people to talk about their traumatic experiences, whether related to war or family separation? And if it is common, with whom do they usually speak about those things?
May I answer to that?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, everything you can talk with male, no problem. And also you can talk if you are female, you can talk with females, everything. It is not a problem. I think it would be nice if you talk about values which locals have here and what's not values, or in other words, it would be better to talk about do's and don'ts which you have here, and what are goods. So you can talk about them, listen or ask about them, to talk about their problems or their past, everything, but they will not appreciate if you ask about their problems at home. So you can talk, but not directly. So some of them who are very conservative, they are very sensitive on this type of questions. And also the other thing which Dr. Noah mentioned, Afghan and Afghanis. Dr. Noah, it is also correct to say Afghani, because we say Afghani. Also, as well as we say Afghan, we say Afghan. Sometimes it is our objection to Pashtuns or Afghans that why we are Afghans or Afghanis, while the name of our currency is Afghani. Why do you force other ethnic groups to accept your name? Because Pashtuns are Afghans. The word Afghans are originally for Pashtuns, but 7 or 6 days ago, they started to name themselves as Pashtuns and push Afghan words for all people who live in Afghanistan. So always we say that we are Hazara, we are from Afghanistan, but we are not Afghans or Afghani. So Dr. Noah, it is both, I think, correct to say Afghan or Afghani. In Iran, people say Afghans, but in Afghanistan, we must say Afghani or also Afghan.
The one other point I would just bring up, I think I would not be surprised if they are more open to talking about some of the history of war than you might expect them to be. I would just, again, allow them to bring it up themselves and not pry. To Mr. Hakimi's point, there is, especially men should be careful about asking about anything sort of related to the family. It's very rude to ask how many daughters do you have, but it's fine to ask, but you can do the math, right? Because it's fine to ask how many sons do you have, and it's actually fine to ask how many children do you have. So it's not actually, and the other trick you can use is how many daughter-in-laws or how many son-in-laws do you have, is another way to do it. But these are, those types of things are oftentimes not discussed.
Yeah, it depends on the people, but many of them do not like to hear this type of questions. For example, if you say, what's the names of your daughters? So what's your wife's name? They are. There was a question about language. Dr. Noah explained well. Since I'm working at the Marriott Library, I have made LibGuides, Persian language LibGuides. There is some resources about Farsi or Dari. Since Farsi is a language for Iran and Afghanistan both, I made them, but separated in some tabs for Afghanistan. And there are some links how to learn Farsi and how to transliterate or make it to Romanized Afghan sentence. And also concerning to the translation, Google translation works almost good. So you can translate, especially the words and phrases which are mostly used. So you can use Google Translate for that. Yeah. If you learn some words and talk with them in their own language, it will be most welcome. As I mentioned in the story, when Dr. Noah came to my house and my wife brought foods, he asked him about the bread. Have you made it? Is it homemade bread? So my wife was astonished and that here Dr. Noah talking Farsi with her and asked her, "Non dar khana pukhtit?" So something like that. She was very happy and thought, your friend talks in our own language. Yeah, it will be most welcome by them. I will share the links to my LibGuide and
that'd be great. Yeah.
It will share with you.
That would be great. Yeah. And I can send it out I can put it on a list of resources that we can share with people locally as well. That would be wonderful.
Just as a follow-up too, there's a question here about the types of activities with new Afghans, and I'd be interested in your recommendations, Mr. Hakimi. But the one that springs to my mind is Afghans really do like the outdoors, and there's something they call mela, which means to go on a picnic, sort of, but it's sort of more of a social outing in some ways. And so particularly for those of us in Southern Vermont, that type of thing, I think, would actually be fairly welcomed. The outdoors and sort of introducing them to some of the areas around. Mr. Hakimi, other thoughts on what are good activities to sort of do with new arrivals?
Yeah, it is very important. Dr. Noah mentioned, if you have a car and help them and take them outdoor picnics and valleys, if you have in your cities, and mountain and other places, it will be very, very welcome by them because they feel that, especially female members of the families, they kind of present for them. So if you together with your other family members, arrange with them, go to other places, it will be very helpful. Yeah, we have Mela, which type of picnic that for example, here in University in Utah, Salt Lake City, our Hazara people have a community, Utah Hazara Association. We have a gathering for every Eid. We have two ceremonies, religious ceremonies. We say Eid Ramadan, Eid Qurban. In both events, we have gathering, we say Mela, and we all gather in a park or a valley and a place which for public people. So everyone prepare foods and bring from their home, or they kind of sharing with their others. So it would be very helpful to make like that.
And as I think about outdoors too, the other thing that's sort of good about Southern Vermont is the climate of Southern Vermont is very similar to the climate of Kabul. Maybe it's a little bit hotter in the summer in Kabul and a little bit colder in the winter, just because it's at a higher elevation, so it's a little more extreme. But for those coming from Kabul, they'll be at least accustomed to this type of weather. If they're coming from the south of the country, it's much warmer and they might not be quite as accustomed to it. But I think a lot of the folks will be coming from the Kabul area.
Yeah, there's a question we talked about recipes. I don't know a written recipe for Afghan foods, but the best way, if you make friendship with an Afghan family, the ladies cook very well Afghan foods like kabli, and some of them knows how to cook Iranian foods. So besides the restaurants, Afghan or Iranian restaurants, you can share foods with ladies, Afghan ladies. They can tell you, explain to you how to cook, and where you can find the materials for Afghan foods. In most cities which Afghan people located, there are Middle Eastern stores, Iranian, Indian, Arab stores. They mostly present the rice which Afghan people use and the other spices. So on those stores, you can find materials. Oh, one of our participants asked why I have moved from San Diego to Utah. You might hear from me, it's because of the conditions. In San Diego, mostly California, it is very expensive to live there and hard to find job. Rent are very high and people cannot buy a house. So here in Utah, Salt Lake City, our community have 50, 60 families here. Most of us, I can say 95% have bought houses. So it is a good clue for the other Afghans to come here, and because they can buy easily a house, and also if they want to rent, it is cheaper. They can find work easily. So to be more friendly area and also find a better job, a cheaper house. So maybe the reason that people select a place to live. And also, if there are other family members, but it is hard to persuade a Afghan refugee to go to a place that there is no any, because they cannot socialize with the local people easily, and also they need to find food for them. So if there is no Iranian, Indian, or Arabic stores, they cannot find halal meat, which Dr. Noah mentioned. So they are very hesitating about their meat. So they try to find a halal meat, which is a little expensive for them. And as Dr. Noah mentioned, pork is a very difficult thing they always avoid. Even some people who do not believe in religion. I have a friend who objects on everything, every religion issues, and even denies the God. But he doesn't eat pork. They bring halal food in the family. One reason is they believe that since they have been told that pork is bad, do not eat, it is najis. So, and also, if other family members hear that family use non-halal meat, so they will avoid eating food in their family. So it is a very bad signal for them. All people tries to say that we buy halal meat and we use halal meat. So you can, if you want to invite Afghan families, you can prepare halal meat and prepare food, this, that, halal. I have friends here and families, we invite them here in our home and we say them, it is up to you to eat. We present the food, but if you do not eat, it is totally okay for us, because some of our food may not be tasteful for you. But mostly, my friends, our friends, when they come to my home, they agree, they like, they taste, and they say this thing that they can eat. Like,
those are great recommendations. Let me, if I can, there's a really good question here that says, from Marilyn, that says, it seems that the SIV process that I describe in my book chapter, which it's also important to note if you read it, what I wrote 5 years ago, but is more fraught and chaotic than Mr. Hakimi's experience. Can we account for the difference? And let me say, I think part of that difference is Mr. Hakimi being very kind and generous in his description of the process. It is very fraught, very difficult. And Mr. Hakimi, I think, didn't give himself do enough justice to the struggle of, he has essentially a PhD in law and is one of the most respected legal scholars in the Ministry of Justice. And then you arrive in San Diego, and all of a sudden, all those educational credentials are out the window, and you're looking for a minimum wage job. And oftentimes, and I think our refugee work will do better, but oftentimes that's sort of, they assume, well, here, have a job as a landscaper, paint houses, work at a convenience store. And that's a really difficult shift for a lot of the SIV recipients to make, both socioeconomically and psychologically. And so, and Mr. Hakimi went back and got US educational credentials, not because he needed the schooling, but because he needed a way to sort of justify to employers that he was as learned as he is. And that's something I just heard from Afghan refugee after Afghan refugee. And in fact, a lot of SIV recipients, in not really recently when things have gotten quite dangerous, but 5 years ago, would come here, get their green card, and actually go back to Afghanistan to work for the Americans so they could make a little money and then come back to America and leave their family there where they are safe. So really going to be important to just be cognizant of that there are many of them, not all, but many will be coming from a sort of the intelligentsia, right? These are sort of the folks that taught at the universities that ran the government. And now in many ways, those jobs are no longer available to them.
Yeah, I also confirm what Dr. Nawaz said. When I say coming here is a bliss for me, considering my experience, which I faced several direct attacks by terrorists. Once I was in the third floor of Ministry of Justice building. Our GSP office were there and third floor, and the Minister of Justice was in fourth floor. At that time, a team of 5 terrorists attacked, and they put us on attack for 2.5 hours. Finally, they were killed by minister's guards, and we could come out. So when I say bliss, when I compare with that, my family could rescue, I could rescue, and I could not go to my Ghazni province, to my home for several years because of Taliban, because of threat during the way, and also because of other problems. When I compare that, I say blessed because of that. We are secure and safe here. But as Dr. Noah mentioned, whatever I studied and later on experienced and worked in Ministry of Justice, I was part of a member of a teamwork, which was criminal law working groups, which made of representative of lawyers of different Afghan agencies like Supreme Court, Attorney General Office, Minister of Justice, Human Rights, and representatives of UN agencies like UNDP and other agencies, UNAMO, also representative of foreign embassies like United States, Canada, Italy, France. So I worked there for several years, amending or reviewing criminal laws. So when I came here, although I paid $400, $500 to make equivalent documents, which recognized as American documents, but when I showed them to the employers, most of them do not pay attention to that. So yeah, when I talked, I mentioned that part, which was a basic right, which I have here. But for sure, we have difficulties. I have problems psychologically when I came here and had situation. We were struggling to how to pay our rent, how to prepare food for our family. And because of that, I left myself in the winter of 2018 to come to Utah. Yeah, so as Dr. Noor mentioned in his book, it was totally correct. We had a lot of problems, but I do not forget, we should not forget that these problems, when we compare Afghans who came through SIV, was very, very better than people who came through UNHCR. They went to Indonesia, Turkey, Pakistan, or other countries. They lived there for several years. And for sure, when we compare, it is much better than them. So some aspect is correct.
And those are all really important points to keep in mind. I've been tracking several, both Afghan friends and acquaintances, but also working on a sort of a research project that's tracking several families that have been coming over, and especially the ones that left in those 2 weeks in August. You just have a wide range of experiences, and some of them literally got phone calls. There's a plane at the airport waiting for you. If you can be here in half an hour, you can go, and if you can't, you can't. And so it was grab a bag, grab whatever you can, and go out of the house. And I know actually some Afghans who said no, like that's just too much. But I know some others that said yes. So I think, again, to Mr. Hakimi's point, and some of the blessings he's had, he had some time to prepare, and his family did. There are going to be some people who didn't have time to prepare. Some of them have been sitting in detention centers. I've been talking to a guy at Fort Pickering down in Virginia, and it just sounds pretty miserable down there. They've improved the conditions somewhat over the past month, but it still hasn't been great. He's a man traveling on his own, and I think for a lot of the men who are unaccompanied, sometimes they sort of get tossed in these warehouses together. And some of the conditions are going to be much better than that. So it's just going to be really hard to tell what exactly the experience is of a family that lands in Brattleboro over the last 6 weeks in particular have been. But there will be a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, let me just jump in a second, Noah, and speak to Jean's question in the chat. What kind of training will be offered to volunteers in Brattleboro? This is part of it, so thanks for coming. Also, I think that once there's some more concrete information about who will be coming to Brattleboro and when, that comes through the ECDC's offices, that they will be providing some of that training. So what the ECDC is doing now is gathering folks who are interested in forming something called a co-sponsorship group, which is a team of 6 or 7 people, which will surround each family that is coming from Afghanistan. And, there will be some, more conversations once that happens about what to prepare for and what folks can do in terms of training. For now, I would advocate reading as much as you can on your own. And Noah, I also wanted to bring up this question. I know that your research is on SIV holders, which is such a key demographic, but from what I understand from the Vermont State Refugee Agencies, the majority of folks who are likely to come here will be coming on the humanitarian parole program. And I have a good sense of what that means in terms of the benefits or lack thereof that folks will be offered. But I don't have a good sense of whether there's a difference in terms of background, SIV holders being folks who contracted with the United States for the most part, right? And I don't know if that's the case with humanitarian parolees or if there are other differences we should be aware of down here.
Yes, I think a lot of that, unfortunately, is TBD. I will tell you from the Afghan perspective, and really my closest associate in Afghanistan right now, he's in the SIV pipeline. So he's got his application in. His brother has applied for a P2, which would also help get him over there. And I've applied to sponsor him through humanitarian parole. So a lot of these Afghans are actually trying to do all 3 of these at once. And it's just a question of which one works out. With the humanitarian parole, most humanitarian parolees have some sort of international connection. And for them to have that international connection, they probably worked with internationals in some ways or were associated with one of these large international programs. So for example, students at the American University of Afghanistan aren't eligible for SIV, but they are eligible for humanitarian parole. And those are the type of people that are coming out through the humanitarian parole process. I'll also say that from some of the things that I've looked at and some of the interviews I've conducted, and I think there will be more about this, but a lot of, in the chaos there, a lot of people just got on planes and got out. And the US government, I should say, doesn't really know what to do with some of these folks. So they've given them sort of temporary status. So a lot of SIV applicants got out and are now paroled, but their application is still pending. And I think it's a real legal question for them, and that has not fully been resolved. And there's still some legislation in Congress that I think would change this in various ways. But for an SIV applicant who has been paroled, should they apply for asylum? Should they not apply for asylum? Should they wait and see if the SIV process goes through? What happens if you have an SIV applicant and a P2 applicant and a parolee all in the same family? These are all really sort of open questions. I still have to say that my educated guess is that the majority of Afghans coming over have some sort of connection, whether working for the international community or, again, being associated with these large US government programs that were aimed at giving Afghan women better education. The American University of Kabul, a lot of these other educational institutions, those are the people that have seemed most at risk, that I know a lot of the humanitarian parole programs have been sort of targeting. But then I do think you will have, from my understanding, thousands of former Afghan National Army soldiers who essentially were the ones that protected Kabul airport, and they were the outermost ring of security that were protecting the Marines who were enabling all of those evacuation flights. And at the end of the day, those were the guys who are standing face to face with the Taliban, actually keeping the Marines safe. And my understanding is the last 3 planes were essentially a bunch of ANA guys that they pulled out of there. Again, the exact numbers, the US government's not releasing them right now. So it remains to be seen. I also don't have a good sense of, I know, so one of my contacts who's in Fort Pickering that I was just talking with, they told him he would be able to choose where he wanted to go. And then they told him he wouldn't be able to choose where he would go. He would just be assigned. So there seems to be some back and forth about how much is done by free will. I'll be intrigued personally and as an anthropologist about the Afghans that choose to go to Vermont. Not many Afghans know where Vermont is. That being said, one of my jokes is Afghanistan and Vermont are both mountainous places filled with grumpy farmers. So I think there is some ways that they'll get along pretty well. But I don't actually know if the Vermont thing would appeal to the more working class ANA soldier that you might get if they are being given the choice.
In answer to Nancy's question in the chat, will people be placed with host families? My understanding is that that's possible. People who come to the United States with refugee status are not placed with host families, but the vast majority of Afghans, from what I understand, are not being given refugee status right now. So these folks will be allowed to be placed with host families with a view, an eye for eventually having independent housing. I wonder either if there are other concluding questions from the audience, or whether, our 2 speakers have anything that you think hasn't been brought up that you'd really like people to know.
Can I add one thing? Yeah. To humanitarian parole or SIV, there are categories which Afghan newcomers are located under. SIV holders, those are people who have those conditions like threat letters, recommendation letter by supervisor, HR letter, and all other documents completed and applied. So they are SIV cases. There are P2, which is a category which includes people who have worked with the Americans but necessarily they do not have those documents available. So they can apply through their head of their organization to American people or agency and apply for a visa. Humanitarian parole is based on humanitarian issues. For example, a lady or a writer or a teacher or professor are under danger. So one of his family members or even non-family members can apply for him or for them. They can come here. So when they come here, they need to prove their problems that they actually need to apply for those to be, they will be here for 1 year residency and maybe extended, but they need to prove that they are in danger, they are at risk. So SIV holders, when they come here, they do not have, they recognized as refugee and they have all benefits. For example, I applied for my sister through humanitarian parole. So everyone of their family, her family, should be separately pooled. So everyone, we should pay for them $575 to USCIS. So they will review and either agreed or reject. So, but my daughter-in-law, she applied for P2 because she does not have all the documents. Still, her case is under process, and she is still in Coburn.
Yeah, those are all important points. I think in a lot of ways, the bigger question is going to be, regardless of what their status is, how stable do they feel that status is? I think some people, especially if you do receive the SIV, you will feel that you are on a clear path to green cardship and legal permanent status. I think others might feel they're in much more limbo, and that will be much more difficult for them. I guess the only other thing I would say, and I know Alex is on the call, and I know that in some of the earlier iterations of this, we talked about really trying to make Southern Vermont as an appealing a place as we can for refugees in the long run. And I think ultimately that should be the goal. But I think in a lot of ways, Southern Vermont has a lot to offer, whether they are here in the long run or whether this is just a really welcoming community for them to be in while they transition to someplace else. And we should try not to take that too personally if they do. I think as we saw with Mr. Hakimi's situation, there's a vibrant and growing community of Afghans in Salt Lake City. And I think it makes a lot of sense to move to a place like that. And then San Diego, everybody drives and you need a car and it's a little more socially isolated. But my sense of Brattleboro is and Southern Vermont and the area in general is this can actually be a great place one way or the other. And I personally am heartened to see this. And I'll say one of my Afghan research assistants who I've been working with, and he's actually working on getting his visa out too. But I was just talking about this event and some of the work that we were doing. And I think for a lot of those Afghans that did work with the US, they feel so frankly betrayed and left behind at this moment. But knowing that on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, there are 60 plus Southern Vermont residents all sitting around brainstorming about how we can welcome Afghans to our communities, I think is something that really does hearten them. And he was sort of amazed by this thing. From my position, I'm very grateful for the work that you all are doing.
Thanks so much, Noah. And we're really grateful to both of you for joining us and giving up these hours of your time on a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday morning in your case, Mr. Hakimi. And thanks so much to everybody for attending too and bringing up these great questions. I've put 2 links in the chat. One is to support the Community Asylum Seekers Project financially, if that's the way you prefer to show up for the work. And another is a link to a sign-up form where you can just express interest in supporting Afghan arrivals in whatever way that happens for you. And we will follow up with you. Either we or the ECDC staff will follow up with you about that as well if you sign up there. Thank you very, very much, everybody. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.